They don't tell you this. Islam fought slavery in Africa long before Europe abolished it. In the heart of West Africa, across the savannas and bustling ancient cities, a different narrative unfolded, one in which Muslim rulers, scholars, and communities resisted the tide of enslavement that swept continents. While European powers were building empires on the backs of enslaved Africans, many leaders under the banner of Islam were waging a quiet but determined struggle against this injustice. To understand how Islam helped stop the slave trade in West Africa, we must first step back to the era when slavery was not only a booming business, but also a devastating force, tearing families and entire communities apart. From the 15th century onward, European traders arrived at African coasts, seeking gold, ivory, and, increasingly, human lives. As the transatlantic slave trade grew, millions of Africans were uprooted from their homelands and shipped across the ocean into bondage. But within Africa, especially in the Islamic societies of the West, a different story was taking shape. Islamic law, rooted in the teachings of the Quran and the traditions of the Prophet Muhammad, set strict limits on slavery. It forbade the enslavement of free people, especially Muslims, and established clear pathways for manumission, or the freeing of slaves. The faith emphasized the dignity and rights of every human being, regardless of status. In the 16th century, a prominent voice rose from the legendary city of Timbuktu. Ahmad Baba al-Timbukti, one of the era's greatest Islamic scholars, openly challenged the injustices of the slave trade. He argued passionately that enslaving free Muslims was a grave violation of Islamic law. Ahmad Baba's writings and teachings reached far beyond his own community, influencing rulers and merchants across West Africa. He insisted that justice required protecting fellow Muslims from exploitation, and he exposed the hypocrisy of those who sought to profit from their suffering. Ahmad Baba's influence was not limited to the confines of scholarship. His ideas found traction among rulers and ordinary believers alike, fueling opposition to the slave trade. When European traders and rival African factions sought to capture and sell Muslims into slavery, they faced resistance, sometimes in the form of legal challenges and sometimes through direct action. The principle was clear: no Muslim could be enslaved, and unjust enslavement was a crime against both faith and humanity. As centuries passed, the struggle only grew more intense. By the 18th century, the transatlantic slave trade was at its height, and European powers were exerting ever greater pressure on West African societies. Yet in places like Futa Toro, a powerful Islamic state in what is now Senegal, resistance was fierce and unwavering. Abdul Qadir Khan, the Almami or ruler of Futa Toro, emerged as one of the most remarkable figures in this fight. Unlike many contemporaries who capitulated to the demands of foreign traders, Abdul Qadir Khan stood firm. He implemented sweeping policies to prevent French slave traders from capturing and selling his subjects. He did not merely issue decrees. He mobilized his people, organized patrols, and established systems to monitor and safeguard vulnerable communities. His leadership was so effective that abolitionists in Europe noted his efforts, recognizing him as a beacon in the fight against slavery. Under Abdul Qadir Khan, the principle of Islamic justice was more than just a creed. It was a living practice woven into the fabric of society. In Futa Toro, the slave trade was not just discouraged, it was actively blocked. Khan made it clear that his subjects were not for sale, and that any attempt to abduct or enslave them would be met with resistance. His resolve sent a clear message to European traders. Here, the dictates of faith and justice would not bend to the demands of profit. These stories were not isolated incidents. Across West Africa, countless Muslim leaders and scholars invoked Islamic law to defend the rights of the enslaved and to challenge the legitimacy of the trade. They emphasized the moral obligation to free slaves, to treat them with dignity, and to offer them pathways to full participation in society. Manumission was not merely an option. It was a virtue, celebrated and encouraged in mosques and courts alike. The impact of this resistance rippled outward. In many Islamic societies, slave owners were required to grant freedom to their slaves after a certain period. or upon the fulfillment of specific conditions. Numerous religious endowments, known as waqf, were established to fund the liberation of slaves and to support their integration into communities. The teachings of Islamic scholars were clear. The ultimate goal was a society free from slavery, built upon justice and compassion. Even as the transatlantic slave trade continued to devastate the continent, the presence of Islamic opposition made a difference. It saved countless lives, preserved families, and created pockets of resistance that slowed the march of the slave trade. European traders found it harder to penetrate regions governed by Islamic law, where communities were organized and united in their opposition. In some cases, enslaved individuals found refuge in Muslim territories, where they were granted protection and, eventually, freedom. The legacy of these leaders and scholars is profound. They did not simply oppose slavery as a matter of policy, they challenged its very foundations. By invoking the principles of equality, justice, and mercy, they offered an alternative vision for society, one that valued human dignity above profit. When European abolitionists finally began to question the morality of slavery in the 19th century, they often looked to the examples set by Muslim rulers and communities in West Africa. Today, the contribution of Islam to the fight against the slave trade in Africa is often overlooked. The popular narrative focuses on the abolitionist movements in Europe and the Americas, but the role of African Muslims deserves recognition. Their resistance was not just ideological, it was practical, grounded in law, policy, and everyday action. It provided hope and protection for millions, even in the darkest times. So the next time you hear the story of slavery in Africa, remember the courage of Ahmad Baba al-Timbukti, who spoke truth to power, and Abdul Qadir Khan, who defended his people against overwhelming odds. Remember the countless unnamed scholars, rulers, and believers who stood against exploitation, offering manumission and rights to those who suffered. Islam's legacy in West Africa is a testament to the power of faith to resist injustice. It reminds us that, long before abolition became a global movement, there were those who fought for freedom, not for fame or fortune, but because their beliefs demanded nothing less. Their story is one of hope, resilience, and unwavering commitment to human dignity, and it deserves to be told.